as representing Harold Flynn, commander of our theater army in the Indo-Pacific. That's precisely what we're squarely focused on, is solving tough problems. He would tell you that this is a joint theater that has joint problems that require joint solutions. And so we as a theater army have struck out under his leadership and under the operational construct of Operation Pathways to campaign forward in theater, making our exercise program, operationalizing our exercise program so that we can iterate with the joint force, that we can turn bilateral to multilateral exercises. We can nest with the interagency and see more multi-domain operations and operationalize our Army's new FM 3.0, which turned into doctrine just recently for those who are at another conference in DC, which many are familiar with that are wearing this uniform, in which our Army leadership released our new doctrine on multi-domain operations. So all of this is actualized through our campaigning across the Indo-Pacific. I had the opportunity to speak with a CGIFMIC course about a year ago, and in the context of that discussion with Navy admirals from services across our theater, given the opportunity to try and describe to them what the theater army was, what our theater army does. And the key thing that I encapsulated is that there is nothing that the theater army does forward that doesn't involve joint interagency at a minimum, Department of State, a partner at a minimum, and then start to work into the multi-domain. So with this causes a number of complexities that I'm sure the panelists to my left or right will get more into, is, well, how do we communicate? Our requirement is to have a joint target quality persistent cop that we can distribute across multiple nodes to be distributed, land-based, mobile, survivable, in order to support the joint force. This is not just a sea and an air problem. This is land provides these forces, provides unique capabilities, foundational capabilities that we have to integrate. And so certainly lots of challenges with this, but as we look at interoperability, the Army's used to working interoperability. We've been doing it for decades with all of those host of folks. So applying those lessons from other theaters and putting in these, the three key pieces of interoperability that I've just caused you to think about is, the name of this is TechNet. So obviously one of them is technical, and that's really where we often go, and many of you all are much greater experts than I in terms of the ones and zeros. But that's just one of the three legs of the stool of interoperability. The second is really why we're together, and it's human. There's a human interoperability that's necessary in order to figure out how to collaborate and work through these problems. We can't just rely on the technical. And the third is procedural. And in order to be effective, we have to prioritize what it is and how we're going to communicate, because we can't take on every problem all at once and expect to have a flat, fast, communicate all to one. For those who receive these requirements, I mean, I as an operator receive these as a G3, and I'm often asked, well, give me your requirements. What are your requirements? Well, I'm going to give you the moon. I want everything. But really, the three levels of interoperability we often apply to how we work with allies and partners. Our 5th SDAB is very good at this. Our 5th Security Force Assistance Brigade is operating anywhere between 10 and 12 countries at any given time. So they work through these interoperabilities things, the human, the procedural, and the technical. But I would challenge this group as we work through these problems, how do we utilize the same thought process in how we tackle each one of these, as we work, as we think about how we prioritize data, as we think about how we prioritize where we place effort, where do we place bandwidth, who needs it at what level for what purpose. And these are all problems that we work and tackle through iterative exercises. Our Operation Pathways gets at this. We do it through our war-fighting exercises, and I'm sure the gentleman to my left and right can talk about their recent warfighter exercise that we really got to practices. And then we work this through wargaming as well. but we have to be careful about who. So I'll cut it back. I'm going to pass my student over to the communicator, Chief Rivera, please.
Thank you, sir. Aloha.
Yep.
Good.
CW5 Angel Rivera. I am the USERPAC G6 Senior Technical Advisor to Colonel Brown. And right at this, so I wasn't asked to give a speech, and I have to apologize up front because I'm a warrant officer, so I kind of just say whatever comes to me. So kind of people channel through me, so take it for what it's worth. With that, coming off of a lot of what General Bartholomew said, and we've had several conversations about this, I kind of wanted to talk about recent kind of developments, as we've been trying to support Project Convergence, which is the Army's contribution to JADC2. We've been trying to build an architecture for the theater that that would be a sustainable, persistent capability that maneuver elements coming ingress, egress to the Pacific Theater could easily land on. Right. Before now, I always thought about architectures purely in connectivity and transport bandwidth to get back to your service architectures. But now the service architectures are kind of up front and foremost in my mind. I wanted to start with, it's never not been a requirement, which is a double negative, never not been a requirement to provide leadership with as much information as possible so they can make informed decisions. The data requirements never change. It is being brought to the forefront today, which out of necessity, it's getting a lot of visibility. But it's important to realize that the technologies that have been behind this and the requirements to provide that has always been there. But now that it's getting the attention that it needs, the technology has to kind of pace with those requirements for the Department of Defense. So, going back to the systems architectures, the one thing we learned as we were building out the persistent COP for the Pacific Theater is that you cannot take for granted the lines that you see on OB1, OB2 charts, right? Because before it was connectivity, it's like how big that bandwidth was, but now it's really about what information we want to pass over that line. And where do we need to consolidate particular types of data? Where are those authoritative data sources coming from? Where do we want to aggregate? Where we're going to do our analysis? Where we're going to do our processing? So now I look at these OB1s, and it's way more complex than it had been previous to now. So that's been the biggest thing. The one thing outside of that, that's just kind of my own personal development. The one thing that I've learned for the Department of Defense or the Army is that we're lacking the talent inside of the service to get after this. As we went around talking to different organizations that are getting after these data requirements, it really boils down to intellectual curiosity, because it's the one individual that sits in the back of the room that just kind of pounds away at the systems architecture to provide the insights that the commanders need. So due diligence and intellectual curiosity, and it's very sparse throughout the service, getting after these problem sets. We need to kind of broaden that so we have more people trying to address that. But with that, the underlying technologies, as I've learned over the last few months, are extremely hard to work too. So it requires that intellectual curiosity and that diligence to kind of get after the problem set. So the maturation of DevOps, not DevOps in the sense of building capability, but the systems architecture that supports DevSecOps, and data engineering and data science, all those technologies have to mature. Because the problem that we have right now is that those are very customized to the information exchange requirements. So I don't know how you kind of bridge the gap between talent, because one person trying to build out those pipelines is one thing, but to do it at scale with the current technologies is hard. So how do you bridge that and kind of bring that together? And then for the theater, I might be all over the place again. I warned you. The PCOP, right? So the PCOP that we built for the theater, the first P in that is persistence. The one thing that we noticed here is as we went through pathways, as we go through exercise support, we do a lot of things episodically. We're kind of set up that way, right? In the Army, we get fielded equipment, We build that equipment, we set it up, we operate it, we tear it down, and we put it back in the comics, and then we wait for the next event. For the theater, we need a persistent capability. So that P in PCOP is the biggest part of it. COP, I think if you label something COP, it automatically fails on contact, right? Because I have yet to see a COP that has been successful, unfortunately. But the P part of that is important because going back to the first thing, you need the intellectual curiosity, you need the persistence, you need the due diligence, you need the technologies which are overly complicated, but then you have to iterate on that capability so you can actually, so it can mature in your environment, and then it can adjust to whatever the new commanders come in, operational requirements change, we integrate with the service components and into the theater, like it's constantly dynamic. So you need a persistent capability, and then you actually have to have joining instructions. You have to have a place for people to land. I think I'm going to stop there. I'll get more into the details as we start to talk about. I really want to focus on what happened during PC 22 and all the kind of challenges we went through. That's all I got to say.
So good morning, everyone. My name is Caleb Ward from the DCGO, America's First Corps. For those who don't recognize me from this distance, I'm a Canadian officer, and I've been attached to America's First Corps for the last 16 months now. It's been a real pleasure to serve with the professionals that we have. The reason we're here today is to ask you for help. And not help to be theater relevant, but help to maintain and sustain competitive advantage. Okay? America's First Corps is doing some unique things from an Army perspective, perhaps not from the Joint Navy or the Navy, but I think we're doing some unique things, and my job here today is to talk to you about what it is that we're doing, why we're doing it, and kind of where we're at, so that those folks here that represent industry can help us, and those folks who represent the great trust of the U.S. Army and the Joint Partners can also help. Okay, so about a year and a half ago, and I'm sure General Bartholomew can attest this as well, Admiral Aquilino put out some direction and it said, think and act differently in this region, in this theater. From that, General Flynn did his own machinations on this, and what he was saying were words like, change the calculus in the theater. And we all know why we have to do that. There's a key adversary that rests in our theater, and that's what we have to pay attention to. And then finally, General Brunson gave direction to his staff, and that really came out as be theater relevant and have a bias for action. Okay, so what does that mean, and what does it mean to how we operate? Well, all corps, believe it or not, as I understand it, and I as a Canadian, we don't even have a corps in Canada. But as I understand it here in America, corps are actually created equally. But if you look at doctrine, corps are meant to operate equally. Corps is meant to operate in accordance with its theater, in accordance with its mission, and in accordance with its task. So as First Corps looked at its theater, vis-a-vis the equipment and the persons we had, we realized that there were some deltas. And so what General Brunson wanted us to do is, as it was changing calculus at the theater, as it was thinking and acting differently, and as it was having a bias for action being theater relevant, as he said, we're going to get away from attack main rear, and we're going to start looking at how we do distributed command and control through nodes. Okay, so as you can imagine, change is difficult. And certainly that forced the staff to start looking into a space that was very uncomfortable for us. Because if all corps are created equal but not meant to operate equally, you can imagine purse, as well as the equipment we had, was designed for a European theater. Well, as we look at this theater, we recognize that the geography is different. There's a vastness in this theater that is unparalleled. The distance between land masses for an army is greater than in other locations. I mean, you can cross from Poland and Ukraine pretty much. It's not the same from island to island. The distance from Conus is incredible. And as a Canadian coming out here, I mean, the first time we went to Guam, we landed in Hawaii, and then they're like, okay, only 8 more hours to go. And I was like, oh my God, we're out there. So certainly the vastness of this theater is worth considering. And then, of course, we have to consider our threat. Okay, intercontinental ballistic missiles, internalized communications, large militaries, are all things that we have to contest with out here in the theater. So what does this mean to us as we start to build out our distributed command and control node system? Well, in particular, what we want to do was build a framework that was designed to enable the Corps to operate in a syncopated manner, but not co-located. Okay, and the why there is because if you're co-located, we can give off an incredible electromagnetic spectrum. And anyone who understands the systems we're running, you know that you can see us. You can see the U.S. Army on the electromagnetic. We know that. And we know that if you can see us in the electromagnetic spectrum, then you're going to target us, and then we're going to be a big smolder beast somewhere in the Pacific. So what? So we need to be distributed. And we need to have some resilience. We need to build on that security. In particular, in addition to that, we need to be co-located with allies. So we don't want to bring that big electromagnetic signature next to a big allied headquarters, because that's also going to put them at risk. So what we started to build out were a series of cross-functional teams that were meant to operate not independent of one another, but not co-located with one another. And that started last year with Yama Sakura in December of 2021. And we actually just had, about a month and a half ago, a culminating event, albeit not an IOC event, during our own warfighter. So we've been operating distributed now for almost a year. And at our warfighter event that just took place, we operated from, I would say, 4 nodes, 5 if you include our fire speed, and with some good successes and some real, lessons to learn. In terms of where we are right now with this concept, I mentioned that we've tried to generate cross-functionality, which demands a cross-capability in terms of equipment. We're learning a lot of valuable lessons, and I'd be happy to speak ad nauseum, as some might say, about some of the lessons later. But what I would say is, what we have identified up front is that we do have a paucity of equipment. First thing I would say is if you're going to have cross-functional nodes that can operate independent of one another, if one of the nodes is destroyed, we want to be able to operate from one of the others. You need FA tabs in each of those locations. You need TAs in each of those locations. You need CAMUs in each of those locations. 4 is not equipped to deal 5 nodes that can do that. The other thing is you need technical expertise. I think we appreciate that some of those very valuable technicians, they are low in terms of volume across the force now. So we need to consider that as well. And then finally, what I would say is the bandwidth question. So as we worked for Warfighter in this last exercise, bandwidth was a currency that we just didn't have enough of. Notably, in order to run key battle rhythm events, what we normally saw on each of the nodes, 4 if not 5, and what we normally would see was node 5 running around on the shut-off systems. And so, and literally like hair on fire, like shut this down, shut that down. So people are working on product, and all of a sudden, the system stops for them. They go into a pause while we focus our attentions in order to communicate across the board to enable decisions. So that's some of the stuff that we've been working to do as well. So as we continue to discuss, and again, my quarter is almost up, but as we continue to discuss throughout the day today, throughout the session today, I'd like for us to kind of loop back to some of these topics. And hopefully you understand kind of what we're doing and why we're doing it. Again, what we're doing is distributed command and control nodes. This is happening. We're going to sustain this. The reason is, the why is, because this is the only way we can operate in this theater as a core. I appreciate there may be some questions. How is this different from happening here, et cetera, et cetera. Happy to speak to that, but I know we'll take up on some of that as well. Certainly where we're at, I think we're in a nascent level right now. We've learned some valuable lessons throughout our exercises. We're moving forward what we think might be an initial operating capability for Talisman Safer. That's August 23, so August of next year. If we can manage MCO, if we can balance some of those equipment and first needs, and develop some of those expertise, I think by Talisman Safer this coming year, we might be at an initial operating concept. I think it's super exciting. There's a lot of stuff out there that the industry can help us out with. I think there are a lot of things here that the green suiters continue to put our minds to will help us to work through. Thank you. Aloha.
Good morning, everyone. Is everyone hear me? Yes. Okay, great. Aloha. It's a pleasure to be here in Hawaii. And thank you, sir, for a great introduction about what the Corps is doing from an operational perspective inside of the space we call distributed C2. And so for the Core G6, our problem statement is how do we enable the Corps to be theater relevant within this distributed C2 operational framework and continue to operate along the competition continuum while we respond to conflict and crisis in these vast distances when the port headquarters is physically located at Joint Base Station. It is a monster of a wicked problem, and I will obviously say that I've had a whole bunch of fun trying to unpack that over the past 15 months. And I truly mean that. What we'd like to do is take the opportunity here to discuss with you some of the things that we're seeing as we start to do some learning, some experimentation, some demonstration, and then start to figure out how we collectively collaborate with the group of folks that are in this room, industry partners, enterprise partners, nested underneath user pack to move towards something that is optimal. To General Ward's point, this nuance in a tactical core versus a core that is able to operate as a CJ-flick, a portion of a JTF or JTF is not small. Right now we are resourced and we are fielded to support operations as a tactical. This also does not include another set of issues that we won't get into deliberately here, but all of the other enclaves that we have to operate on in order to support operations in this sphere. So Centrix K, Centrix J, so our entire mission partner environment we need to operate on. The other thing I'll talk about is, from our perspective inside of the G6, is we think or seek to enable this capability. What we understand is the core synchronizes joint fires and effects and provides C2. What's the DIEL? And the key bullfighting functions that we're looking at are intelligence, sustainment, targeting, and then C2. So as we start to figure out how we develop a network architecture and distribute our services architecture in a way that enables this, you can imagine that we start highlighting a ton of gaps. As Colonel Adam Sanderson stated, there's a process element to this. So unpacking how we would normally create a network that was widely available and sort of stretch the peanut butter as thin as possible and begin to ruthlessly prioritize and determine at the mission analysis where we want the network to be accessible. That is not something that I can do alone, and so we've enlisted in the support of User Package 6, the 11th Air Command, and the Enterprise Army to figure out how we optimize our tactical transport infrastructure and then connect into a greater network that allows us to communicate over these vast distances. I'll pivot here to bandwidth as currency, and I'll also throw in the term latency. So those are two things that we have to make very, very ruthless, prioritized decisions on where we spend that currency. As General Woodward is talking about some of the painful lessons learned during Warfighter on how we make decisions with what we have, inside of the core G6, what we're trying to understand, how do we optimize what we have better so that the currency is well spent. The idea here is that you have to eliminate technical debt. And some of that is process-oriented, some of that is not the best application of how you set up your server or your network architecture, and some of that is lack of automation, and some of it is just inherent in the design, because the design is not, it wasn't delivered to support distributed operations over large, vast distances. So as an example, if one of the nodes who does current operations is trying to communicate where all of the mission command systems come together, the decision sometimes has to be more bandwidth, but sometimes that incurs higher latency, depending on what we have available today. So do you want more throughput, so the ability for traffic to get up and down that road, except it has to travel a further distance? That then creates another problem that you might have to solve, which is authentication. So now that service that has to travel over that long road, and we now have a tactical core that's been designed to function in a main TAC rear, which creates this proximity for your services infrastructure, so that tightly coupled TCP/IP, hey, do you see me? Yes, I'm here. Hey, do you see me? Yes, I'm here. I didn't see you. Send a message again, send a message again, send a message again. That creates an incredible amount of noise on your network. How do you manage that? Is the decision shutting things off? Is the decision more bandwidth? is the decision less latency? Some of this is process, some of it is technology, and it's not one thing happening at a time. It's all kind of got to come together at the same time so that you can make informed decisions on how you need to proceed in order to support the mission. I'm trying to make this as simple as possible. Some of the things that we understood during Warfighter is that we need a global WAN architecture. This is a conversation that we are having amongst the enterprise partners, USPAC, theater partners, so all of the folks that are involved in not just standing up the network architecture that's in place that we connect to, but also making it readily available. This creates this COI, this community of interest, that has to come together to solve this problem. What we need is access and wide availability. We need diverse, assured, and resilient agnostic transport wherever we can get that, because we might, in a theater-relevant core, require access to joint and partner resources wherever they might reside. This may not be a one-core flight, it may be a two-core flight, and that core may be operating from a regionally aligned network architecture that is in existence today that doesn't naturally connect to the Pacific architecture that we have today. These are tough problems to solve, and then which part of it do we begin to solve first? These artificial network boundaries that inhibit or prevent connectivity have to be discussed, and then we have to figure out how we start to move towards something that is more optimal. First Corps' ability to compete cannot be bound by regional resources. That's what we understood during warfighting. So just a discussion of resources that are available in order to shape the fight for the core that may not be easy to gain access to are the discussions that need to go into the development of a network architecture, not how we expect to access the resources and then overlay and presume that the network architecture supports it. Because today it does not, but it is a fantastic problem to try to solve. I'll talk briefly about services and our persistent sort of hybrid information environment. The desire of the Corps Commander is that we would be called to serve and we would get on a plane with TACT or a carry-on suitcase. What this means is that we don't want to haul our real server infrastructure all over the Pacific. What we'd like to do is make use of the network transport that's been laid in place by folks that deliver that in the Pacific, and also connect potentially with small form factors, depending on what the mission is, to already establish persistent information environments that have inherited routing that we can just get busy and get to work. We need to be able to come as we are with modernized TSI server stacks, with old ECCS stacks, and then connect them to this persistent information environment. That's why it's hybrid. These are our edge nodes. All of it has to work and fit together. There's not just one capability that's needed. Dispersion demands that reduced physical architecture, and it requires connectivity to what I would call a tactically enabled cloud that inherently delivers mission command as a service, which I know Paul is going to talk about here. But instead of thinking about how we deliver mission command from our edge devices first, let's think about how we might have a widely available global WAN architecture that allows us to connect to a tactically enabled cloud and use on-prem infrastructure when required. This will allow us to then start to set up environments that we can scale up or scale down, and we can be agile enough to function as a JFLEC, or as a portion of a JTF, or as a JTF, period. Decisions that we're having to make right now revolve around replication, clustering, do we use a hub and spoke model, authentication, and then on the data side, identity. And then lastly, I'll touch on data very briefly. I'm happy to talk about that. We are definitely pivoting in the core to talk beyond just systems and applications to the data environment. But what we discovered during Warfighter is that we require exposure to the data. So you need to have the data exposed, come out of those email attachments, PDFs, PowerPoints, in a way that's exposable, queryable. we need to have a tool to put that in. So if you're gonna move from PowerPoint, you gotta have something to go into. And then we need the right talent to do that heavy data engineering leap, which is the first step to becoming a data-enabled or data-centric. At the end of the day, whatever that looks like, that fabric that comes together with the persistent cop at USERPAC will also require, and this is where we need help from industry, decision support tools, analysis tools, and visualization tools. Yes, we do have DOTS equipment that we use as visualization tools today, but we love all of that to come together to give us options for how the commanders can make decisions better. I'll stop there and I'll turn it over to the MDTF Deputy Commander. Thank you so much.
So my name is Jason Ryan. I'm the Deputy Commander for the 1st Multi-Domain Task Force. What I'd like to do is kind of take a moment and give you a little context about what the NDTF is, what it does, and then kind of give you a couple of examples of just how critical maneuvering data is in order for us to accomplish our mission. So what the MDTF is, the purpose, it was designed to integrate kinetic and non-kinetic effects in order to neutralize the adversarial anti-access area denial defenses. So you've heard the A2AD bubble before. What we are designed or focused on is neutralizing pieces of it in order to enable the Joint Force Command. The formation's about 2,000 soldiers. This has got a headquarters element and 4 subordinate battalions. The 1st battalion is a multi-domain effects battalion, and in that battalion resides our space, cyber, and electronic warfare capabilities, exquisite capabilities that don't exist anywhere else in the Army. Second, we have a long-range fires battalion, which is a long-range hypersonic battery, a mid-range capability or MIRC battery, and a HIMARS battery. We have an ADA battalion. It's the indirect fire protection battalion, provides air missile defense, and then finally a sustainment or support battalion in order to help support us logistically. So what the MDTF does, understanding that what the MDTF does today may not necessarily be what the MDTF does tomorrow, as we're standing up a second MDTF in the Pacific, and it also may not necessarily operate the same as the MDTF in Europe operates, because the mission sets are a little bit different, so bear with me. But the way we're organized right now is the MDTF is an echelon above core organization that supports the Joint Force Commander. Again, the mission is neutralizing the A2AD assets to enable the maritime, air, and land components. And we do that by processing targets across the Joint Operations Area. The whole Joint Operations Area is really the focus in support of the maritime, land, and air, not specifically the land component commander. And we conduct these operations by deploying multi-domain cells across the Pacific, ideally in the first island chain, and we tailor those cells in order to accomplish or target whatever effects that we want to achieve throughout that area. In order to achieve layered kinetic and non-kinetic effects on a specific target, we need a sensor to shooter kill web. Oftentimes we talk about a kill chain. We're focused on a kill web, which literally takes any sensor asset on the battlefield, and we want to be able to pair it up with any shooter on the battlefield, which leads us to a couple of the issues that we've identified. First, joint sensor to shooter, true joint sensor to shooter requires data exchange across the DODN, and that requires a deliberate process to target firewall policies, network connections, and data throughput. The takeaway from that is, as we enter an event or an exercise, that deliberate process is possible because you have time to do it. But as we escalate and we move into conflict, we don't have time to go through COMEXs. We need agile. We need agile networks that can support quickly. And then second, long range and exquisite shooters require high target quality, which increases data and lower latency thresholds. So what the takeaway there is, we've always thought that the bigger the command post, the bigger the data requirement is. That's not necessarily true with us, because as we're operating at a much smaller cell, like a battery operations center may have a target quality threshold where the latency thresholds are so small and the bandwidth requirements are so large in order to achieve effects. using that long-range hypersonic, capability may be the same as, perhaps at the core level. So, maneuvering data is absolutely critical for us, and ultimately the intent is to achieve maximum options for the commander and create dilemmas for an adversary. And this is the way we're looking to look forward to any future discussion. But thanks for your time. I'll be following up.
All right, good morning. Aloha. First of all, I want to say thank you. It took me 10 minutes to get here today. Normally it's 10 hours to 12 hours, flights and cars and everything else. So thank you very much. I do appreciate it. So as I go through this, I'm going to quickly talk about the 311 so people understand what that is. Some data basics in regards to transport challenges, and then I'm going to hit a way ahead and currently which way we're going and what we'd like to see. So 311 is the Theater Communications Enabler. We support the over 100,000 personnel within the Theater Army across the Indo-Pacific area of operations. We are a multi-compo command made up of active, Army Reserve, and VA civilians. And our two, spread across 16 time zones, I have 2 brigades that primarily lead the charge, 1st and the 516th Theater Signal Command. So those are our 2 primary drivers across our entire AO. So our core mission is to extend the network to the tactical edge. Now look at this as the 3, and I call it the 3 big wins. We got to always make sure that we look at redundancy, reliability, and speed. Given the tyranny of distance out here in the Pacific, mainly because of geographical dispersion, this is a complex web of activities. So one size doesn't fit all, one thing isn't able to do everything. It's a complex web. So we use a mesh of commercial and military, as well as tactical and enterprise communication platforms to enable that reliable, resilient networks throughout the AO. One of my secondary jobs is I am the AO, or proven official, and responsible for the Army DODN Indo-Pacific networks. I maintain the controls to protect the data that flows across the networks, as well as assure secure processing and movement. So I got that dual hat that I got to make sure I'm constantly keeping in balance, the operational needs versus the enterprise needs, and the strategic needs, and how does it come together to make sure that A, we're securing that network, but also getting out there and meeting the warfighter's intent. So let me talk real quick about some data basics. Timely decision making. It's a key aspect. It's having pertinent data, I'm going to say it again, pertinent data available upon request. We collect a lot of data out there, but are we getting pertinent data to the right person at the right time, the right place? This requires synchronization of data sets, usually very large, from sources across vastly geographical dispersed locations. To add to this complexity and to the challenges of supporting disparate networks are compounded by the volume of data that is often required for that decision making. So, again, it's really important that we look at the whole picture. We're kind of shifting away from time-consuming manual processes. There's a need for data systems, network storage, computing that automatically collect, organize information so we can get it quicker and it's a little bit faster to our forces. So the need to transport, it's universal. I don't care who you talk to, whether it's a corps, division, we go up to the theater army level, everybody needs transport. You could have the greatest system built, but if you can't transport that data across the spectrum of where you need it, it's for naught. So to help deliver this, and everybody knows I've been pushing on this, we need to know specific requirements. it is important to categorize those requirements so that we know, hey, this has to go first, this is second, this one can come on a little bit third. We only have a finite amount of resources. We are unable to put it all through the same wickets at the same time. So we have to have that ability to understand the specific requirements so we can put the right stuff through at the right time, using the right stuff. So what does this mean? This means agnostic platforms and systems, which allows for selection of optimal paths. And to fill those transport capability gaps, we need to continue to seek that agnostic, flexible solutions. So currently, we leverage Gate, Blackboard. It gives us some flexibility and basic ability to seamlessly integrate with our downtrace elements and get data to the end of the battle space to support the tactical warfighting system architecture. So this is everything from fires, intel, to sustainment. So that integration between the tactical and the enterprise will be a technical challenge, and it is a technical challenge. Uncoupled policies, built around it, that's my job. We got to try to, how do we uncouple some of these old policies that we put in place? So as the IO, I look at this and the risk of the operations all the time. What are we doing? Are we doing it right? Are we flattening where we need to flat? And putting in those redundant and robust systems around the end. Another challenge is minimizing latency. One thing to talk about fires, it's another thing to say, hey, this data has got to go all the way back to the United States, go through a data, come all the way back, and hopefully that person's sitting at the same spot that we just saw them. So some primary obstacles, when I look at transport, are security, policy, and trust. And we are getting after that. We're moving toward zero trust, but we're not there yet. So we need those automated methods, approaches for allowing accessible and relevant information. So, we're looking at the ICAM solutions, we're looking at things like that. What solutions can I have in place so that a warfighter who's sitting right now, let's say in Kansas, can literally go over here seamlessly, utilize their systems, and get right into the fight where the commander needs them. Because it's really about where that commander needs them. As an enabler, that's my job to try to bridge those solutions. And that's why I'm asking the team here assembled before me, the commercial and military side, to come up with that solution, help come up with that solution. How do we do that? How do we do it quickly, make it relevant, and within cost parameters that we can actually afford? We can do anything. We put enough money to it. Let's face it. But, we have a finite amount of funding. And it would probably take about the entire DoD budget if we really want to come up with it. So we have to really take a hard look at what we can do and what we can afford to actually push out the route. As a way ahead, and then I'll get off my high horse here. Minimizing latency. I see a hybrid approach to this, and that's just me. Proliferation, the number of satellites, such as LEO, MEO constellations. 5G will help enable edge computing. Finally, the DISAPAX 100 gig installation, which I think will have a huge game changer, at least in the Indo-Pacific. And I'll talk a little bit more in the question and answer session. But those are my initial thoughts. Do appreciate it. I'll turn it over to Paul.
We're already 45 minutes deep in an hour and a half session, so I'm trying to do this real quick. If you look back 3 years, when the ECMO was created, I was told Mission Command is a tactical system that never exists in the cloud by an Army system. And now we find ourselves 3 years later where USERPAC is saying our ability to succeed and win in this AOR requires cloud computing, distributed data in order to enable distributed command. We've come a long way in 3 years, which we have a really long way to go, quite frankly. If you look at the new cloud plan, there are a few things that we have in place. First thing is to expand cloud. Well, why is that? Because the necessity for distributed storage is critical as a global asset. These things can't just be a reach-back capability. And my ability to share information, just like Journal just said, is I've got to have transport designed in a way to enable distributed communication. But if you look at our architecture today, really we have a very fragile architecture. We have a very kind of AOR-specific only architecture, but when we think about our ability to access the right information from the right location, we don't know necessarily where that is. We can't predict where that is. And so we can't plan ahead for years on time if we're always going to get it right. It means that data has to be online and accessible anywhere. And now I need an actual architecture that supports that. And we work and currently aren't really designed for that. Beyond that, if we look at our systems and how we actually share data, they're also relatively closed. We don't have a lot of machine-machine interfaces exchanging structured data that allows us to focus people in our processes truly on when human brains need to put some information together. You know, we talk about data being a strategic asset. That's very true. You hear people talk about data as the new ammunition, or the ammunition for the future fight, as I would say the current fight. But the reality in practice is that we're making a lot of bullets fighting. We're doing a lot of brute force, human-driven things around data, when really we need technology to be doing that work for us, so that we can focus people on the real decisions that we need to be making in real time, because we do not have the time to have humans fill the gap for technology that's already filled that gap. We talk about people, process, and technology. The challenge that we have is oftentimes we spend people and processes in the space that technologies aren't involved, because we're too slow to adopt the technology. Yes, technology needs to change and enhance the way that we want to fight it, for sure. But when we think that we can predict the requirements all up front, right? By the time we actually get those capabilities, really, we find ourselves in front. So there's a few kind of structural imperatives that we have to enable here. I drew a pretty simple picture for Fourscore as we were going in kind of the after-action report, which is happening before fire exercise. And I said, distributed command and control requires distributed data requires distributed systems. Distributed systems require distributed compute and store. And distributed compute and store requires distributed transport. And we've got to think of each one of these layers, and we've got to modernize each one of these layers if we truly want to enable this data mesh, right? This shared transport agnostic ecosystem as a global asset. Like our ability to succeed and win in the Indo-Pacific region requires global assets. So we've got to design ourselves from an architecture perspective to enable those global assets online, on demand at any point in time, as we can predict it. So that we can focus people in our processes to understand distributed command and control and how that's actually applied, because we've got to be able to call in data anywhere. Like if you think, if you go and you Google, what information are you going to need to navigate the next year? And when are you going to need that? Can you write that on a piece of paper right now and go contract that out precisely? And the answer is no. So why do we think we can do that in the DoD? Beyond me. So the cool thing about what you see here up in this panel is we're talking about enabling decision dominance in the Pacific LR. But if you actually look under the hood, all of the assets of the United States Army are aligned in enabling this capability. How do we open up essentially our requirements to be a bit more broad, be a bit more objective-based, be more outcomes-based, create more space for the actual people developing and delivering capabilities, be then incentivized to receive real-time feedback to be able to respond to the capabilities in real time and actually have a global infrastructure that supports that. So when you look at the new cloud plan, you see kind of the strategic objectives listed out. We talked about expanding cloud. Second one, we talked about the zero trust architecture, which gets into essentially distributed transport. Third one, we talked about the ability to field new applications and new capabilities on demand, right? And then fourth is truly now our ability to understand and use data. And so the beautiful thing is all of the pieces of the Army are aligned to enable what we're talking about. Where we need your help is really becoming an enabled factor. And the work we have to do with each one of those layers to truly become a global Army that has access to global capabilities in real time so that we can succeed in playing in this interval. So I'm excited to be here, thankful to be here, and dive into some questions.
All
thank our panelists for keeping it in the window here. Typically, we'll talk right up to the end, and you won't get to ask any questions. So, and I think everybody was pretty brief. So, I've got a few things to lead off here. Hopefully, generate some questions from the audience. Feel free to jump in at any point. We have a microphone placed here in the middle of the room. Be so kind as to step up to the microphone if you have a question, so everybody can hear it. So this first question, sir, Bill Bartholomew, certainly came with you, but also so given our recent experiences back all the way to May of last year with Back Century, through Forager and through Warfighter this year, from all of that experience, what decision quality data is the user back that the theater army looking for its supporting? How do we best facilitate that information flow?
So I think I hit a little bit up front in terms of joint target quality, persistent data. That's kind of the center point of it. How do we see the enemy? How do we see the terrain? How do we see ourselves? And actually, I know Angel wanted to mention this, and he can get this early on, is within Project Convergence 22, user packs serve as a CJTF icon, and we actually utilize command post computing environment, system of record, in order to track those very things. Very simply, how do we see the enemy? How do we track points of origin, points of impact of enemy systems, and then from there, how do we combat those with our systems? And so this kind of speaks to Colonel Bryan's piece, is what the multi-domain task force does. We developed out the multi-domain task force and really looked at and think about the things that he's doing. What it caused us as an Army to really think about is, how do we merge existing architectures that are resonant within the air defense community, that are synchronized with the Air Operations Center, that have an air COP, and then link those with offensive capability, so that defensive and offensive all can come together as a joint force. So at our level, at the theater level, those are the key things that we're tackling. It's got to be iterative, it's got to be joint, and it starts with those key pieces of information. I think the lessons that we're seeing from 18th Airborne Corps in Europe, for example, we're drawing upon all of our inputs into the Army data plan that were discussed by numerous panels across the board, all feeding. So I'll pause for comments.
No, go ahead. So I guess what I would offer from the Corps perspective, certainly very similar to what the JTF or user pack was seeing. If we look at Warfighter as an example, what was hugely important to us was first of all, not just to be able to see what Higher has in terms of assets and resources and understand what that is, but to also understand what Lower is dealing with. We have to appreciate, notwithstanding the fact that First Corps is working in a distributed manner, all of our divisions are now trying to work distributed as well, so there's another level of complication in there. But then one of the unique things that we were doing in this particular warfighter, and I think will become probably commonplace going forward, was building out convergence windows. And so for those who had a chance to look at FM 3.0, you might have a better appreciation for what that is. But as we try and layer effects in time and space for particular action, our need to see what Higher has in terms of residual assets and resources that are kind of available in the space, coordinate that with what we need to achieve in any given time on the ground, and then synchronize that in a very short term, not just across our nodes, but in time and space for the effect on the ground. I think that's the real demand of that data and that information going forward.
So I'll comment very briefly here. The ability to take a look at what those convergence windows are. Dispersion is not new, but dissecting your warfighting functions with an architecture that doesn't necessarily support that is. And so being able to have a formal architecture, transport architecture that allows you to access what is needed in order to perform inside of those convergence flows, and also prioritize in our distributed manner which node and what data needs to move in prioritization order is critical. And so that's a lot of the learning that we did there as we move to a more data-enabled core. What we're trying to understand and what we are responsible for. The core commander has said that data is his business, and our data process flows by which we inform his decision making. He has given us the 4 things that he uses to make decisions. We package engineer that, and then we develop the architecture to use that is also able to be transmitted to other partners that are working in collaboration with us.
Thank you. So this question is start with Mr. Puckett. So we're generating globally more than 2.5 trillion bytes of data every day as humanity. So it's not, in the environment, it's not a question of lack of data, but to the decision maker, obviously there's only certain things that he or she needs really to make those decisions. How are we as an enterprise enabling the filtration of that data to get the right information to the commander at time of need?
So there's actually some context in this question that I want to share. When the Army put out the data and cloud execution order back in 2019, then the Lieutenant General
Do you happen to know how they're asking questions through the app?
asked the Army how to
Do
do
you know
this
how they're asking questions through the app?
And I said, sir, it really allows you to map your data flows and how you actually see and understand and exchange data across systems where humans exist in those loops. So you can really understand what it is that you're trying to achieve. Like really what value is now existing at the end of that data workflow, what conclusion is being made, whatever it is, and then see the entire history of data and how it's been shaped over time to enable those decisions. It allows you to finally start to unpack and see how different people and systems all contribute to that, to then allow you to find where your efficiencies are, so you invest modernization in essentially establishing exchanges of information directly between systems, enabling an architecture that allows you to become more open. And that conversation actually drove into what the Army created around the data services requirements, which kind of is more so a precursor into the DevSecDev's data decree. But that work is forcing us to truly understand how we use it. Because some would say, just give me all the data, just give me all the data. And so then we'd have a conversation of, bandwidth's not enough, so we buy bigger pipes, we do all these things to enable all this information to be passed down. But then someone might raise their hand and say, well, what are you doing with that data? Processing, stuff locally. I'm running an analytic that sits in my brain as I go and look at this thing, and the question could be posed, could a machine do that for you? And could maybe the results of that analytic be structured in a way where the only thing that I have to share with you is you might care about this, you might care about this, you might care about this. And at that point in time, what are the actual pipes that I need? Are they really that big? Is latency that dramatic for it? Perhaps not. And so it forces us to essentially understand how we're using data, what those workflows of data are. So to the point of there's so much data being generated, sure. But that doesn't mean everybody needs all of that data disseminated to them. They probably need the ability to discover that data. At the very least, query it. Have the right access management policies that are understood universally so that we can securely exchange that data. If you're going to look at what really JADC2 is trying to get to, correct myself, see JADC2, because as was said earlier, there's no fight that we have in any AOR that's not without privileged partners. We need to be able to expose data in a way so that it's discoverable, truly discoverable, to allow people to consume it the way they need to consume it. And what we need to do is leverage technology to handle all the things we can do in a very high volume structured way so that we can allow humans to fill the gaps where we truly need a brain to understand how we take that structured data and some other unstructured data, join some things together and make a decision. And so what we're working on, for instance, with something like Mission Command is where we actually just created a whole bunch of humans in the loop. And a big thing that came out of Warfire was just seeing the actual end-to-end workflow for how essentially current operations and future operations is done. We actually have systems where we have structured data and we, by process, put a person in front of that structured data to copy and paste it into an unstructured format, and then have humans derive more information in an unstructured way. Like we're literally creating the opposite of what it is to truly be data enabled. And so we just visualized that. We said, does this make any sense to the natural conclusion is going? So then it was like, well, what do we have to do in how we design systems to structure data, make it online, so that we can now actually have a structured flow here, remove humans working on data. So what it's forcing us is to understand the data lifecycle, right? And what we're finding is there are a lot of gaps in resources that we have to enable data engineering work to really create online and structured data, so that the investments that we've been making around the analytics side of the house and the visualization side of the house can simply show us the results. And so it's this aha moment for us of like, all this data is first and foremost, we need to make it discoverable and bring on that data engineering skill set and those data engineering resources, right? Because we've been really hyper-focused on the analytics and the visualization side, but even, I was just out in Europe, and Colonel Callahan out there running stuff with 18 is like, ignore the visualizations. What matters is what's under the hood. Is we now have structured data that's discoverable, so now we can make any decision because the data is there that I need. So there's a lot of stuff here with the data lifecycle that I think is really critical, that allows us to get to the right data, right? Not just all of it, but the right data to make the right decisions.
Thank you, Mr. Puckett. So I'm going to go ahead and open it up to the floor. If you have any questions, please state where you're from and address the question to the panel. Don't ask me anything because I know nothing. But
Hi, thanks for your time today. I'm Kimberly Underwood, Class's Single Magazine. You all identified bandwidth as such a huge challenge. How do you see that challenge being resolved partially or initially in the near term and then longer term solutions?
Take a crack at this. So, first thing, it's if you look at bandwidth and bandwidth issues, I think one is our internal processes. Do we actually need all these video cards and this and that? How much do you actually need? What's the right amount? And that has to be determined at the command level, at that, whether it's the Corps, the Division, Brigade, they need to determine what is the exact data. And that's an internal process. What we found, even at Warfighter and stuff like that, everybody wants to listen in, everybody wants to be on. That takes a lot of bandwidth. So who really needs to be at the meeting? Who really needs to be, what data really needs to be transferred and transported? And what's the right answer there? Again, as we go through the future, I'm looking at, you get the 100 gig, this piece 100 gig, I'm looking at 5G and other things. Those will help us add additional bandwidth, but I don't think that's the end all. You're always going to have that human intervention doing basically process improvement of ourselves all the time. The more data we put in, the more white noise shows up. What do we do to create that, to bring that white noise down so that we just get the right input at the right time to the right person?
Take a second swing. I think of this kind of in layers. Typically, when we go and compete, if you will, or even run any exercises in any AOR, we think very AOR specific when it comes to resources. And what we kind of have then practiced is we invest in transport capabilities, circuit capabilities, our networking capabilities that still assumes kind of this AOR-centric world. But we're seeing in exercises, and people are, for instance, the last one, code-based services, right, from our partners over in the IC, which is the natural part of day-to-day life, web-based services. But in order to access those services, you actually map out all of the hops that we had. Say we want to leverage some local capability of commercial transport. What we actually do is we actually have about 50 different hops that traverses the globe a few different times in order to access those capabilities. And actually, is there a better path for you? So in order for us to be transport agnostic, we've got to decouple from an architecture perspective how we have access and capabilities when it comes to commercial, globally accessible black transport, and then where we hop into secure fabrics and where we actually access secure data and secure systems that are posted in very strategic and very much US controlled spaces. And so we've typically seen those as kind of one and the same and like have to be very point to point in nature. When in actuality, if we truly want to be transport agnostic, if I want fiber, 5G, LTE, LEO, MEO, GEO, those things just simply being mediums to get me into global transport to then take the best path anywhere for anything, we've got to design architecture for that. And that needs to be seen as a global resource, albeit enabling regional capabilities. And so from that perspective, there's a number of movements that you see in the Army to establish a global WAN capability. We've been very kind of regionally from a WAN perspective, like a global WAN capability that ties into all of these regional assets, right? And then it's really building on what the Human Tactical Networks team has been doing with GATE and trying to bring this mesh together, but really enabling that as a global resource that truly ties the enterprise and the tactical together. And then from a bandwidth perspective, it allows us to, again, like I said, unpack what do you really need where, right? Like an expander is like, hey, I need this data. It doesn't necessarily mean you need that data disseminated to you, right? In like raw, very large format. Do you just really need pixels disseminated to you on a screen that is very tolerable to the bandwidth, and also something that's really less leverage with my full face plan, where I really just have almost like a few primaries because I'm still able to meet the need, right? It's not that everything has to be just these massive pipes that runs the world. And so those massive pipes really should be enabling how we kind of tie the strategic and the operational capabilities together. So you kind of see that employed in the fire architectures we have on the planet. We want that to do all the heavy lifting for the Army, right? So the things that the decision makers need to be making are simply just that last mile of information that needs to be joined and the capabilities to be chewing on. So I see bandwidth requirements and our data requirements really need to complement each other, right? Far too often we assume data workflows, there's not a big bandwidth discussion. And we really need to be saying there's a better opportunity for the data workflows that doesn't necessarily require everything being the biggest comms, and therefore massive investments that also becomes very fragile. Because we can't invest in everything being 10 gig pipes globally, right? We've got to be smart about how we do
I just want to add, so this kind of piggybacking off of both kind of discussions, being closer to the knife fight, relatively recently, I've seen a very insignificant amount of data making maneuver elements extremely effective, right? Like a message, not even a message, a portion of a message. And that speaks to like, what do we really need is really the question, right? So we don't need all data. I agree it has to be discoverable. And we don't need all bandwidth, right? Like we have to understand the operational requirement. And then you have to dissect the operational requirement. That's what it goes down to. So you have to be very intimate with the problem. And data, that's, again, my exposure is really understanding the requirement. Not get away from the superficial, hey, I need these things to be successful. And we kind of look to service the entire, the entirety of the Army on capability. But really kind of digging into the operational requirement, dissecting it, and then identifying the systems architectures, the information exchange requirements, processing that's required for that particular thing. And then you grow from there, right? I think we kind of lose sight of that, right? I mean, the one thing we don't do well is the only way you can pull a human out of the loop is understand the processes that they perform. So nobody's sitting behind an individual trying to automate those processes. So as we kind of dissect these problems, and we've been dealing with a lot of it with inside of PC22, superficially we understand how fires and stuff works, but now how do we get to the other things that are going to kind of get to that target quality kind of insights into targeting. Into those processes, you have to really dissect the problem. You really have to look at it. You really have to just kind of do one chunk at a time, and eventually you will have enough chunks that you're actually building an effective capability.
Angel, so I wasn't gonna comment, but now that you spoke,
So I have one more thing to say.
But I think what you're alluding there to is something that we also experience in Warfighter, and I think you're saying you experience the same thing in PC, which is DevOps. And so it's the ability to take a look at something under the appropriate stimulus to actually test your hypothesis of your assumptions of what is actually happening on the network. It was almost impossible for us to understand what the server architecture should look like aligned to the business process mapping of what the data flows was looking like until I could see the warfighters actually operating with the appropriate stimulus to do it. It's very, very difficult, as General Overworth has witnessed with us, for us to train ourselves without the appropriate stimulus. And so getting in those spaces, using the partners that are in this room to come into those spaces with us that have a different perspective or understand technology in a different way to say, hey, do you see this? Look at what I'm looking at. Something that Mr. Puckett highlighted was how we were potentially moving structured data into unstructured data and then using cognitive processing with, what did you say, an algorithm that was in somebody's mind, in order to then turn that into knowledge for decision making. When you draw that out, you're like, wow, okay, here's how I can adjust.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, I'm gonna say one last thing. You know, data, I know, because again, foreign sorry. You know, and I'm just getting exposed to data, and I know that data engineers have been at this for a really long time. Data scientists have been part of this, but again, when you're looking at an OB1, when you're talking about data, it's taken for granted that we go from this point to that point. And just watching the engineering for those data pipelines is extremely significant, and it's extremely challenging to get to structured data, to have data stores, to process it, to build digital data. All of this stuff from end to end is not trivial. And again, you really have to understand the problem set, clearly articulated from our operational people in the service, and dissect it, and then understand how you can effectively build a systems architecture to kind of derive whatever information they need for that. So, all right, that's all I'm going to say.
Is there any other questions?
Absolutely.
Good morning. My name is Andrew Schofield. I'm with a lot of technology. I'm actually the director of artificial intelligence. This question has nothing to do with artificial intelligence. So my question is, multiple persons on the panel have all asked for our help. But our question is, how do we get to you? How we have technologies, we have government purpose rights on some of those technologies. How do we actually show them to you and see if they fit with your unique individual? You said regional. You said different problem sets that what applies to Europe doesn't necessarily apply here. What applies to CONUS doesn't necessarily apply here. How to get this stuff in front of you so you can see it and give us the feedback to tell us, are we on the right path? Are we on the wrong path? Or like a quicker way to integrate and to test out with you?
I don't mind starting. So I'll tell you, this is a hard one. So my job, one of my hats as the senior technical advisor is to do technology introductions and to give. It's hard for me to engage with a vendor, so I could go around and take a bunch of meetings all day long. I don't avoid meetings, but I look at it. I come to a vendor when I see opportunities, right? Because things essentially have to be resourced, right? So I can take a million calls and do a bunch of meetings, but that really might not equate to anything, and I don't want to waste anybody's time. But the one thing that vendors don't do is put things, to me, 9 times out of 10, don't put it into context, right? I don't need a new GWIS capability, right? I told my boss, I've said it a million times, if you gave me $10 million today, I will buy, or if you gave me $10 million today, it would be $9.5 million in people, 500 in duct tape and 550 cord, because I can make a lot of stuff happen with good people with stuff that's just laying around, right? So I don't really right now. I need to do the best I can with what I got. I don't need a new GWIS capability. So if a vendor comes to me, I want them to understand the problem set. Right? I mean, there's a lot of great technologies out there, but what is the Pacific's problem? I mean, listen to General Bartholomew's discussions. Go read the papers that General Flynn has written. I'm sure General Miles has some things out there. He's talked through things. And while you're here, listen to the problem set. And then I mean, you just tell me, oh, I can do everything. You know, SD-WAN, great. I can spell SD-WAN. But what is in the context of our theater? How are you getting after our problem set with infrastructure west of the IDL, and how does that fit in? And you have to ask more questions. Don't present technology, because that's not going to help you. Right? We need to know what's is in context to our problem sets.
Yeah, I will. So, thank you, Angel. I appreciate you reading that off. I think a portion of what Chief Rivera is trying to communicate is that it can become overwhelming. But what I will say is that for the folks that we've asked for help for, is that we have a plan. And specifically aligned with user path, First Course has a training path that we are getting after. And we have deliberate operational requirements that we want to experiment with that inform how we better optimize distributed CT. Your technology, just to temper your excitement, your technology might not be the path for whatever's happening next for the next 2 quarters. And I understand that can be disappointing because you have a technology that's ready to go today that could potentially enable us. And so it's a conversation, and it's an ongoing conversation. So for folks that are in the room from First Corps, please raise your hand. Okay, so those are the folks, right, that you can communicate with, right, and that are here to take your cards, look at a technology, and say, hey, we think this might fit our need moving forward. Come to us, give us a demonstration, and we can talk about how we might do business, and then we will align that with what is happening inside of user path. That is the approach that First Corps takes, but I'm here to tell you, it's not everything all the time, each time. Every experiment for us is an exercise, every exercise is an experiment. There are some times that we're moving towards demonstration, which is like a more refined capability, but we want to speak with you. And so again, for folks that are in the room, specifically for Chief Gensler, who's in the room, Sergeant Major Helton, and for Dr. Rapaz, please raise your hands. If you are trying to understand distributed operations, those are the folks that you speak to. Okay? To answer your question on that.
I don't know if I didn't come across right. He did say, I tried to communicate.
It's not that I'm not trying to go after new technology. We definitely need it, but we have different focus areas, right? So just in efficiency, anything that we do needs to, we need to be thinking about persistency, right? So I don't want to do things 10 times over. I don't really have a lot of time to test a lot of things. There are organizations and entities inside of the user path theater that can do a lot of experimentation, but because in our case we're significantly undermanned. Everything that I need to do has to be bolted onto a capability that exists, and it has to build maturity in the theater. And I know some people might have a problem with fight tonight, but we need a landing place in case the flag does go up, right? So if I learn something, it's great. We all learn something, that's great. But if I have something, if I have the dock that you can vote on, and it's pretty, and I'm adding more capability, that's better for the theater than just kind of learning on something.
I hate to cut anybody off, but we have about 8 minutes left, so
Yeah, but I'd like to answer that real quick. I mean, unfortunately, I can't give you hey, this is the one person you got to go to. There's multiple organizations, and every organization, every layer has a different person to put it to. I have a lot of folks send me stuff all the time. I send it right down to my engineering and integration group because they're the ones that are taking a long depth, at least the transport element, everything that's going on in theater, could be a persistent cop or this or, mission partner environment, stuff like that. And they're trying to figure out what's the best tool to utilize in that toolkit, while we're putting this program together. So there is no one answer of, hey, it's got to be just this person. We don't have that one office. You can integrate all that and they ship it off to everything else. And I think that's what you're trying to get at. Like, hey, where's that touch point that I got to go to? Really, it's all levels pretty much are able to bring stuff in and bring it to bear, and then we try to go forward with that.
change shift a little bit, because there's some folks in here that I know might be able to help out in the modeling and sim side. So I know that there's a new office, right, called the Chief of Data Artificial Intelligence Office that can help bring in more joint requirements. And in order to do that, and help you guys understand how to move data within the Pacific, if I know that industry could probably help with if they have access to data to help provide more fidelity in modeling and sim. Are there challenges that you guys see that could be helpful in that area for requirements for modeling and sim to provide more fidelity to help tease out some of those requirements that industry might be able to provide solutions for from an operational perspective?
Mary Ann caught half of that, you said operational perspective.
Right, I use my primary voice, sir. You know what your requirements are.
Go ahead.
So
I'll let Liz kick it off now.
right, but the modeling and sim, now is the challenge. What we can do if all these different data sets from the Army, the Air Force, to that joint fight to develop more fidelity modeling and sim to help you understand what requirements and future capabilities. So,
I don't know if I have an answer because you kind of like laid out my answer in your question. However, just to think the bigger problem that we're trying to get at, which is how do we have an environment where we can simulate carrier strike our connection to that, or simulate our connection to F-35. What does that look like? What do the tactical data links look like between those things? For us, inside the core, to be able to build that out and make it live in a live environment is a huge undertaking. If we could have an environment, if we're working with ResearchPack on, and we can simulate that, and we have a virtual live constructive environment, we can test it out, tear it down, figure out if it works, inform future requirements, before you even take it into the dirt, or do it as a combination of both, take it into the dirt and connect that virtual live constructive environment. I mean, I think that would be great. I don't necessarily know, I'll be honest, or we would have that ability for the bandwidth to take on something like that. The enterprise is certainly leaning in to support that from I mentioned specific capabilities. But there's an environment there that exists. ResearchPack is leaning in to develop an environment like that before we can start to address these problems.
So, the director of the CDAO, director of the CDAO, Craig Martell, said the data doesn't, the Army Department, DoD, does not have an AI problem, they have the data readiness for AI problem, right? When we run exercises, typically, we had tactically fielded capabilities that was sized from a resource perspective in order to execute operations. It was not sized to retain and use data, bring it back to the head shed, and then have some big data analysis run against it. We typically just throw that data away. So part of our challenge is access to computing storage resources that actually exist to provide persistent data analysis capability that's essentially aggregating this information from each one of these exercises that we're running. Part of the opportunity and the value of what we've been demonstrating for cloud computing for the last year now is the ability to retain that data, not really, to actually be able to run analysis against it. So one is simply having data is kind of critical to them getting into modeling sim, but even beyond that, from a engaging with partners perspective, us having that be something that is structured, discoverable, something that is usable across the services, and then even like an ecosystem to facilitate like new modeling and sim capabilities. So like, hey, there's access to data, let's understand this. I'd say probably the best opportunity for something like that is, like CRADA, if you will. For instance, we have a CRADA, we're running analysis against anomaly detection within our cloud environments for security relevant purposes. Huge value, because we're retaining that data, we're structuring that data, we can learn from that data. We are in the midst of some of the work with the data fabric initiatives coming out of UC3T to be able to aggregate information. Previous PC, part of the way forward was just to put a storage capability out there so we could actually train all that data and bring it back to the head shed and start to study and analyze it. So we're moving in that direction. We need help, and I was trying to take the product comment that was made earlier. We need help understanding the opportunity of technology, right? Kind of how it enables different ways of doing business, because you're spending time understanding our problems is really what it is we're trying to do from an operational perspective. But then complement to that is all of the elements of how the Army delivers and builds new capabilities, going engaging with those teams, because more and more we're moving towards agile acquisition. And you see this coming out of the ASL office, a major push for us to leverage the software acquisition pathway, because currently our lead time to build new capabilities is just entirely too long, right? If you weren't part of the conversation 3 years ago, Godspeed, right? We're now demonstrating the value of seeing a capability in an exercise, seeing a gap, seeing an opportunity with new product and technology, and actually demonstrating that 3 months later, right? Kind of to the point you made, is that requires you to have a few different engagement for small businesses. But engaging in forums like these with us, I think, is a good first step.
Oh, sorry.
One last question.
Oh, go ahead,
We have
go ahead.
3 minutes left, and the meeting gets in.
All right, yeah, Colonel Sticks Shoot, I'm from the Air Force, Chief Marketing Office, and I resonate with your comments on Mr. Puckett and Chief. The Air Force has undertaken effort in the Integrated War Plugging Network, which I believe both of you on in the recent months. And we've made a lot of progress. And I also understand that we share the same problem. And when we go to war next time, it won't be the Army fighting alone, it won't be the Air Force fighting alone. We'll be fighting jointly. How do you spell jointly? A-R-M-Y, right? It's mostly Army. And so I think I want to invite the Army and the Air Force to really come together and have more intimate dialogue about how this fabric, this network should look going forward, so that we can in fact be cooperative in our engagement with our adversaries. So that we can actually build a robust, resilient infrastructure, a cyberspace infrastructure in which we can maneuver and retain our maneuverability and also deny our adversaries freedom of action. So it's an invitation to more dialogue.
One quick Indo-Pacific, sorry, sir, needs to say that all operation centers between the service components need to integrate, right? Like that, I know that's a super simple thing, right? So our ADOC, the MOC, the AOC, you guys need to figure out how to talk, right? You need to connect to each other. You need to start exchanging information. I mean, that's a huge win. We can have those conversations. We're doing it right now in PC 22, right? We are talking to the Marines, we are talking to the Navy, we're talking to the Air Force. Those are very episodic connections that we will sever at the end of that exercise. If we could do it for 30 days or 60 days inside of PC 22, why would we persist those connections? So I mean, that goes a long way. If I can see, if I know I have a path to the AOC, I mean, that goes a long way with doing any integration, data information exchanges, and I think that's a simple kind of request.
That's right, you do now. And we were at PC-22 engaged with you guys down in Southern California and making huge progress, enabling the OCL MDKs to be operable. So we're already halfway there, so let's keep on pushing.
So I think this brings up a really good point that Six and I were just talking about this yesterday. And kind of the reason why I opened with the comment that I did 3 years ago, like, oh, that's a tactical thing that has nothing to do with fun. We're finally at a place where numerous services are realizing that our ability to exchange information in real time is currently leveraging the meeting points that we've had derived 20%, which means we're traveling halfway around the world just to say hi. And then if there's something special in an episodic way, we create these very fragile point-to-point relationships within an AOR, and then when that exercise is done, these things are dismantled, and it doesn't become a persistent capability that we all, right, CJ, in agency 2, can all tap into. And this is actually something that DoD CIO is pretty hyper-focused on, because our ability to fight within an operational network typically pretty fragile, because we take very custom, proprietary, special things to establish that scaffolding globally, when the world has already created scaffolding for us, global transport, commercial resources. So pushing further to leverage those commercial capabilities creates this robust architecture. And I think there's really a great complement for what the Army's trying to do in the global WAN discussion for initiatives that the Air Force has already gotten into when we talk about software-defined wiring networking, and having black, commercial, robust, open internet transport being leveraged in order to enable software-defined wiring networking from a global perspective and secure systems. And so I actually think there's one complement with some of the work you guys have done in the IWN. When we talk about really making the DODIN, quite frankly, the global backbone of it, right? Like, We don't need to bring special sauce to that party. We already leverage a whole bunch of partial transport, and also helps us from a time and investment perspective. Right? Let the world make those investments, and we should simply agree with them.
The one thing that we have different from our adversaries is that we have a free market economy. And we have a lot of really stupid people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. Let's exploit their products.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Join me in thanking our we'll pass along this. Is it
Yes, so what happens right now is, you saw the owners where we